In the weeks after, normal came back. New, better, and quiet for the right reasons. News of Karen Lawson's arrest and the stack of charges, racketeering, conspiracy, fraud, stalking, burned through the county like dry grass. She and her crew posted bail, but everyone knew the clock was ticking. The HOA went into receivership, accounts frozen, powers dissolved. A resident committee set a new election. Mr. Patel joined it. He didn't tremble now. He spoke steady, shoulders high. The biggest change was county-wide. Heather took our case file, videos, ledgers, logs, and walked it into the commission chamber. She pitched the simplest fix with the sharpest teeth, the Homeowner Protection Act. Any HOA tow or inspection would now require a written request to the sheriff citing specific, documented probable cause, logged and reviewable. No paperwork, no action. Abuse it, face penalties. The vote was unanimous. The room exhaled. Bullies hate sunlight and forms in triplicate. One sunny Saturday, we sat on the porch and let the day do nothing. The wind chimes, the aesthetically displeasing ones, tinkled. Kids wobbled by on bikes. Peace sounded like chain oil and birdsong. Aunt Dot's faithful sedan rolled to the curb. She climbed out with a fist of mail and that look that says gossip comes free with postage. Special delivery, she said, handing me envelopes and plopping onto the steps. I heard about your new county rule. Finally, put a leash on the little tin pot tyrants. It should help, I said. Help? She snorted. It's glorious. Makes them fill out real forms. If a bully fears anything more than a punch in the nose, it's a box that says explain in detail. We laughed and let the sun work on our bones. We talked weather work and the fresh petunias at the entrance. Paid for at actual cost. Imagine that. When Dot stood to go, she paused at our mailbox, the heavy black one I'd sunk into a steel post and a stubborn slab of concrete. She said, tapping the lid. For all the nonsense, the fake inspectors, the vandalism, the swatting, the drone, she never touched this. Guess she drew a line, I said. Dot shook her head, dead serious. No, sweetheart, she can jig dame. Your utilities and stalk with a camera and catch state felonies, but a mailbox. She grinned. That's federal. Even bullies know which wire is live. She winked, slid into her sedan, and puttered off. Heather leaned into my shoulder. The street looked ordinary again. Ordinary is underrated. I had my tools. She had her badge. Together, we fixed what was broken. And this time, it stayed fixed. I went inside and got my good binoculars, the ones I use for bird watching. I came back out and focused them on the drone. It was a popular model. And on the underside, on one of the landing struts, was exactly what I was hoping to find. A small green sticker with a string of numbers. The FAA registration number. Every drone over a certain weight has to have one. It's the law. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera, and zoomed in as far as I could. I braced my hand on the deck railing and took a dozen pictures until I had a clear, readable shot of the number. The drone just hovered there, watching me. Its operator probably thought I was just some angry guy taking a blurry photo. They had no idea I just captured their license plate. I stayed outside for another 20 minutes pretending to work on the deck. I used my phone to film the drone's movements. I documented the time, its position over my property, and its flight path as it eventually buzzed away to the east, toward the other side of the neighborhood. I had it all. Time-stamped, geotagged video evidence. Another crime, illegal surveillance and harassment. That evening I showed the evidence to Heather. She pulled up the FAA database on her laptop. Let's see who our pilot is, she said, typing in the registration number. The result came back in seconds. The drone was registered to a company called Aerial Visions LLC. It sounded generic, professional, but a quick search of state business records told a different story. The LLC was registered just 2 months ago. The address was a P.O. box, and the sole registered agent was a man named Martin Gables. Heather's fingers flew across the keyboard. Martin Gables, she murmured, running his name through the DMV database. Age 48, lives at 214 Chestnut Lane. She paused and looked at me. That's 2 blocks over, and his wife's maiden name is Lawson. He's Karen's brother-in-law. It was a clumsy, arrogant mistake. They thought a shell company would be enough to hide behind. They were wrong. The next morning, 2 of Heather's deputies paid a visit to Mr. Gables. They didn't go to arrest him. They just went to serve a warrant for the seizure of the drone, the controller, and any and all digital storage media associated with it. Gables, a doughy man who looked like he'd never seen the sun, was apparently stunned. He surrendered the equipment without a fight. The department's tech guys went to work on it immediately. The flight controller was a goldmine. It had a complete log of every flight the drone had ever taken. GPS coordinates, altitude, duration, it was all there. There were over a dozen flights over our house in the past week alone. But that wasn't all. There were also flight logs showing it hovering over Mr. Patel's house, over the Hendersons' house, over the homes of 3 other families who had signed a petition demanding Karen's resignation. It was a clear pattern of systematic illegal surveillance and harassment against anyone who opposed her. She didn't watch homes. She watched people. The memory card from the drone's camera was even more damning. It was full of high-resolution videos. Videos of me in my yard. Videos of Heather leaving for work. Videos of Mr. Patel's children playing on their swing set. A prosecutor's dream. This wasn't just another charge against Karen. This added a new layer of ugly, premeditated criminality to her case. She wasn't just a fraud. She was a stalker. She had used technology to terrorize her neighbors, to peer into their private lives from the sky. It was the last nail. And we hammered it into her coffin with the undeniable, irrefutable data from her own machine. The end came at dawn. The sky was just starting to lighten from black to a deep, bruised purple. I was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. I knew today was the day. Heather had left for work an hour earlier, long before her usual time. She was in her full uniform, her face set and serious. She was leading the operation herself. Case officer was Captain Ruiz. Heather ran the briefing. Ruiz handled the warrants and searches. She needed this one. My phone buzzed. It was a one-word text from her. Go. It was the signal. I stood up and walked to the front window. Down the street I saw them. A coordinated, silent dance of dark vehicles without their lights on sliding into position. No SWAT. Quiet, professional. This was about arrest, not annihilation. There were 3 teams. One for Karen Lawson, one for her brother-in-law, the drone pilot, and one for the last remaining HOA board member who was in on the scheme. I watched as 2 deputies walked up Karen's perfectly manicured stone walkway. They didn't pound on the door. They just knocked, firm and polite. I could imagine the scene inside. Karen, woken from her sleep, probably thought it was another victim coming to grovel. The shock on her face when she saw the uniforms and the warrant in her hand. The slow, dawning horror as she realized there were no more tricks, no more lawyers, no more lies that could save her. The game was over. She had lost. A few minutes later, they let her out. She was in her pajamas and a silk robe, her hair a mess. The cuffs on her wrists looked obscene against the delicate fabric. Her manicure was perfect. Her morals were not. The woman who had terrorized our neighborhood with an iron fist, who had built an empire of fear on a foundation of petty rules, now looked small, pathetic, defeated. They put her in the back of a patrol car, and it pulled away as silently as it had arrived. As the sun finally broke over the horizon, casting a warm glow over our street, my mind started to replay the whole sordid affair. A montage of her downfall. Door cam video, utility report, breaker box clip and takedown, HOA meeting disarm, illegal tow confession, burner bag, and K9 arrest, ledgers, drone logs, affidavit. The lattice tight enough for a verdict. I took a sip of my coffee. Best coffee in ages. The quiet on our street felt different this morning. It wasn't the tense, breath-holding quiet of before. It was real peace. We had our home back. I took out a small tablet. Mrs. Lawson's lawyer claims I was the aggressor. I'd like to show the court a video of the incident, recorded on my phone. I connected the tablet to the courtroom's monitors. The video played. The entire courtroom watched the scene unfold. They saw the tow truck driver's smug dismissal of my rights. They saw the second man get out, swinging the heavy chain. They heard my clear, calm warning, and then they saw him swing the chain up my legs. They saw me defend myself with a simple, non-violent takedown. The video ended with me standing over him, telling him the illegal tow was over. I stopped the video. The courtroom was silent. Karen Lawson was staring at her hands, her face pale. Her lawyer looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. "As you can see, Your Honor," I said, "I used the minimum force necessary to defend myself from an armed assault on my own property, an assault orchestrated by the very person now claiming to be a victim." I placed another folder on the podium. This is a sworn affidavit from the owner of the tow company, who is now cooperating with the sheriff's department. It confirms he was operating illegally and was being paid in cash by Mrs. Lawson for months to harass residents she had disputes with. Judge Carmichael looked over the documents. She looked at the frozen image of the man swinging the chain on the monitor. She looked at Karen Lawson. Her expression was cold granite. "Mrs. Lawson," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Did you see the video your lawyer just presented?" Karen looked up, confused. "My lawyer didn't present a video." "Exactly," the judge snapped. Because you don't have one. Because your entire claim is a fabrication. Mr. Walker, on the other hand, has receipts. She turned to Karen's lawyer. "Counselor, you are dangerously close to being sanctioned for filing a frivolous and malicious lawsuit. You are wasting this court's time and attempting to use this institution to harass a citizen." The lawyer started to stammer an apology. The judge cut him off. "The request for a restraining order is denied with prejudice, meaning you cannot file it again. I am ordering your client, Mrs. Lawson, to pay Mr. Walker's court costs, and I am forwarding the transcript of this hearing along with all submitted evidence to the district attorney's office to be included in their ongoing criminal investigation against your client." She banged her gavel. "We're done here." It was a complete and total victory, a public repudiation of a last desperate lie. As I packed my briefcase, Karen and her lawyer scurried out of the courtroom. I walked out into the hallway and saw Heather waiting for me. She had a small, proud smile on her face. "I heard it went well," she said. I nodded. "Another one for the stack." We walked out of the courthouse and into the sunlight. It was a good day for the truth. Karen Lawson had tried to use the system to crush us. But the system, when presented with cold, hard facts, had just crushed her instead. Karen was out of legal moves, out of goons, and out of credibility, but she wasn't out of venom. Her empire was crumbling. The criminal charges were piling up. But she still had one last pathetic trick to play. Surveillance. She was obsessed with us now. She needed to know what we were doing, who we were talking to. She was looking for anything, any tiny infraction that she could use to save herself. I started noticing it on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the backyard trying to finally enjoy a quiet weekend. I was re-staining the deck, the smell of the wood ceiling sharp in the air. Then I heard it, a high-pitched electric whine. Not a bee, not a cicada. It was mechanical. I looked up. Hovering about 50 feet above my back fence was a drone. The fence is wrought iron. It wasn't a toy. It was a professional-grade quadcopter, the kind photographers use. It was just sitting there silent and still. Its camera lens pointed directly at my house, at me. I felt a hot flash of anger, the absolute invasion of it. This was my home, my sanctuary, and she was still trying to get inside. My first impulse was to go get a rock or a hose, but I stopped myself. That's what she wanted. She wanted a reaction. She wanted a video of me throwing rocks at a drone to show a judge. I wouldn't play her game. I would play mine. There was a long pause, and then I heard him take a shaky breath. "I have things," he said. "Emails she sent me. Voicemails, threats." I was too scared to come forward before, but I will now. "I will testify." "Thank you, Mr. Patel," I said. That would help a lot. I hung up the phone. Another piece for the stack. The final piece. We had her. We had the testimony of her own men. We had the physical evidence of her conspiracy. We had the financial records of her fraud. And now we had the victims, no longer afraid, ready to speak out. Heather walked over and stood beside me, looking at the contents of the locker. "She built herself a little kingdom," she said softly. "And this was her castle." I looked at the fake badges, the piles of threatening letters, the files full of personal information. "Yeah," I said, "but she forgot one thing about castles." "What's that?" "They can be sieged. And the walls of Karen Lawson's castle were about to come tumbling down. This storage unit wasn't just a room full of evidence. It was her tomb. Even with the mountain of evidence, Karen Lawson wasn't going to go down without a final pathetic fight. While the district attorney's office was building its criminal case, Karen's lawyer filed a civil motion. She was seeking a restraining order against me. It was a laughable, transparent tactic. The official claim was that I had assaulted her associate, the tow truck goon I'd put on the ground, and that I was now a threat to her safety. It was a desperate attempt to paint me as the aggressor, to muddy the waters before her own trial began. She was trying to use the law as one last weapon. The court date was set for a Friday morning in a small, stuffy courtroom at the county courthouse. Heather couldn't be there in any official capacity, as it would be a conflict of interest. She was listed as a witness, but the judge wanted to hear from me first. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't need one. I had the truth and I had video. I walked into that courtroom in my work clothes carrying a small briefcase. Karen was already there, sitting next to a slick-looking lawyer in an expensive suit. She was dressed conservatively, trying to look like a respectable pillar of the community, a frightened victim. She wouldn't look at me. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Carmichael, called the court to order. Karen's lawyer stood up and launched into a dramatic 10-minute speech about my supposed campaign of harassment and intimidation against his client, a dedicated public servant. He painted the tow truck incident as a brutal, unprovoked attack. He made it sound like I was a menace to society. I just sat there and listened. When he was finally done, Judge Carmichael looked over at me. Mr. Walker, your response. I stood up and walked to the podium. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady. Everything he just said is a lie. Karen's lawyer jumped to his feet. Objection. The witness is being inflammatory. The judge waved him down. Sit down, counselor. Mr. Walker, please present your case. I opened my briefcase. I didn't bring a speech. I brought receipts. On the night in question, I said, an unlicensed tow truck from an unregistered company arrived at my home to illegally remove my legally parked vehicle. This was done without a court order and against my direct verbal warnings. The tow was ordered in cash by Mrs. Lawson. I placed a folder on the podium. This is the police report from that night, which includes the sworn confession of the tow truck driver stating he was hired by Mrs. Lawson. It also includes a statement from the second man admitting he was paid $50 to intimidate me. Karen's lawyer objected again. Hearsay, Your Honor. The judge sighed. It's a police report, counselor. The takedown was swift. Plainclothes deputies walked into the coffee shop. Miller saw them and his face went white. He grabbed one of the phones and bolted, shoving past a barista and out the back door. He ran right into the parking lot. He didn't get far. A K-9 unit had been positioned at the rear of the mall. The handler gave the command. A Belgian Malinois, a blur of dark fur and focused intensity, shot across the asphalt. The dog didn't bark. It was silent, efficient. It hit Miller low, clamping down on his thigh with immense pressure. Miller screamed and went down in a heap. The deputies were on him in a second, securing him, calling off the dog. It was a clean bite, exactly as they're trained to do. Enough to stop him, not to maim him. They recovered what he tried to throw away during the short chase. A small canvas bag, a burner bag. Inside were 3 cheap disposable cell phones, one of which made the 911 call, a stack of cash, and a handwritten note. The note had instructions, a script for the swatting call, and at the bottom, a single damning sentence. Confirm with K when done. Heather read the final text update and let out a long, slow breath. The tension finally drained from her shoulders. They got him. They got the bag. They got the note. It was over. The immediate threat was gone. I walked over and put my arms around her. I could feel her trembling slightly, the adrenaline finally wearing off. She had faced down the worst kind of betrayal, the worst kind of attack. And she had won not with force, but with foresight, with intelligence. She had been the surgical instrument, and she had just excised a cancer. The treasurer will flip, I said. He'll give up Karen to save himself. Heather nodded against my shoulder. He already is, she said, her voice muffled. He started singing the moment the dog let go of his leg. The stack of evidence wasn't a stack anymore. It was a mountain, and we were about to drop it right on Karen Lawson's head. The treasurer, Arthur Miller, sang like a canary in a coal mine. Faced with a list of felonies that would put him away for a decade, his loyalty to Karen Lawson evaporated in about 30 seconds. He told the investigators everything. The fake inspector scheme, the vandalism, the illegal towing company, the 2 sets of books for the HOA finances, the extortion, and the swatting. He admitted Karen planned the whole thing, that she'd given him the burner bag and the cash herself. He was just a terrified foot soldier, and then he gave them the crown jewel. He told them about the storage locker. It was rented under a fake name, paid for in cash by Miller every month. It was Karen's operational headquarters, the place she kept all her dirty secrets. Getting the warrant was a formality. Heather had more than enough probable cause. She asked me to come along as a civilian witness. She wanted me to see it. She knew I needed to see the end of this with my own eyes. A warehouse of orange doors. A deputy used a pair of bolt cutters on the heavy padlock, and the sound echoed in the concrete hallway. He rolled up the metal door. The air that rushed out was stale and smelled of dust and deceit. We shined flashlights inside. It was a nightmare of HOA tyranny. There were boxes stacked to the ceiling. On one side, a clothing rack held at least 24 of the dark green polo shirts with a yellow Inspector HOA text. Next to them was a box full of cheap plastic security badges, the kind you can order online. Stacks of pre-printed violation notices. It was a kit for manufacturing a police state. All the costume, none of the law. But the real treasure was in a set of locked filing cabinets against the back wall. The deputy popped them open with a crowbar. Inside were the ledgers, the real ones. Miller had told him to look for 2 sets of books. The first set was the official record, the one shown to residents at the annual meeting. It was full of inflated costs for landscaping, pool maintenance, and insurance. The second set of ledgers told the real story. It detailed the kickbacks. It showed payments to the bogus inspection company, which was just a shell corporation that funneled money directly back to Karen. It showed the cash payments to the illegal tow truck company. It listed every resident who had been fined, how much they'd paid, and where the money had actually gone. It was a meticulous record of years of fraud and extortion. While the deputies were carefully bagging and tagging the ledgers as evidence, I noticed another box tucked away in a corner. It was labeled complaints. I opened it. Inside were files on dozens of residents. People who had challenged her, questioned her authority. Mr. Patel's file was on top. It was thick. It contained photos of his house, copies of his business license, even a printout of a credit report. She had been digging into the lives of anyone who stood up to her, looking for leverage, for anything she could use to threaten them into silence. My file was there too, and Henderson's and a dozen others I recognized. This wasn't just about money for her. It was about power. Absolute, unaccountable power over her neighbors. Just then, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. Hello? Mr. Walker. The voice was nervous, hesitant. It was Mr. Patel. I saw on the news they arrested Arthur Miller. Is it over? He asked. I looked around the storage locker at the mountain of evidence being cataloged. It's over, Mr. Patel, I said. She's done. The tow truck driver stared, his cigarette falling from his mouth. His jaw was slack with shock. Aunt Dot's window slid open. Careful with that chain, sweetie. OSHA frowns on dumb. He had expected a shouting match, maybe a few shoves. He had not expected to see his giant friend get folded up like a cheap lawn chair. I stood over the man on the ground. The illegal tow is over, I said. Tell Karen Lawson to send a real army next time. Just then, 2 sets of headlights turned onto our street. A county sheriff's patrol car followed by Heather's unmarked sedan. She had been on her way home and heard the dispatch call for a disturbance at our address. A call the tow driver had made just as he was told to. Heather got out of her car, took one look at the scene, the tow truck, the man groaning on the ground. Me standing there with my phone still recording, and she understood everything. The deputies took our statements. The tow driver, now pale and stammering, admitted he was working on direct cash under-the-table orders from Karen. The company he worked for was unlicensed. The man on the ground was a day laborer he paid $50 to for security. The entire operation was illegal from top to bottom. They arrested both of them. As the patrol car pulled away, Heather came over to me. She put a hand on my arm. You okay? I'm fine, I said. Another one for the stack. She looked at my truck, then back at me. She's getting desperate, Heather said. This is going to get worse before it gets better. I knew she was right. Karen Lawson had run out of pawns. Next, she'd be coming for the king and queen directly. Desperation makes people stupid, but it can also make them incredibly dangerous. Karen had tried intimidation, vandalism, and outright theft. All of it had failed. All of it had been documented. She was boxed in and she knew it, so she decided to play her last, most vicious card. She decided to try to get us killed. It was a Tuesday night. I was grilling some chicken in the backyard. Heather was inside finishing up some paperwork from a long day. The sun was setting. It was peaceful. That's when my phone rang. It was Heather calling from inside the house. That was our signal. The one we'd set up after the HOA meeting. If things went sideways, if there was a threat right at our door, one of us would call the other. It was faster than texting and quieter than shouting. I killed the flame on the grill and walked inside, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. Heather was standing in the middle of the living room, her service weapon in her hand, held low and ready. She had her phone pressed to her ear. She was listening, not talking. She looked at me, her eyes dark and serious, and put a finger to her lips. Then she pointed toward the back of the house, to our reinforced bedroom closet, our designated safe room. I didn't need to be told twice. I knew what was happening. This was the nightmare scenario every cop's family fears. Heather had received a silent alarm from her dispatch, a 911 call reporting a hostage situation. Shots fired, officer down, all at our address. It was a classic malicious swatting, an attempt to trigger a full-scale, dynamic SWAT entry on our home, hoping the confusion and chaos would lead to a tragic mistake. But Karen Lawson did know my wife. Heather had anticipated this. Weeks ago, she had put a special protocol in place for our address, a flag in the 911 system. Any call of that nature had to be verbally confirmed by her on her personal cell before any sirens were turned on. The call she was on now was her second in command, a captain she trusted, confirming the call was bogus. She hung up and took a deep breath. "It's a swatting," she said, her voice tight. They're tracing the call now, but they're not coming in hot. I've already got a soft perimeter being established. Quietly, I looked out the window. I couldn't see anything, but I knew they were out there. Deputies in plain clothes taking up positions in the neighbors' yards, hidden in the shadows. They weren't there to storm the castle. Our shrubs had more badges than a cop show. They were there to catch the people who made the call. Heather had turned their trap into her own. "The call was VoIP," she said, her phone buzzing with updates. "Internet phone. Hard to trace, but not impossible." She was calm, but I could see the fury simmering just beneath the surface. Someone had tried to use her own people, her own procedures to murder her and her husband. This was the final line. We waited. The neighborhood outside remained dark and silent. No sirens, no flashing lights. Karen's plan was failing, and she didn't even know it. Then Heather's phone buzzed again. "They got it," she whispered, a grim smile touching her lips. "Public Wi-Fi, a coffee shop at the Northgate Strip Mall. They're pinging the device now. The trap was closing." Heather relayed the information to the teams already in place near the mall. "A ghost operation. They have a visual," Heather said, reading the text. "It's not Karen. It's the HOA treasurer, a guy named Miller. He's sitting in a booth sweating bullets. He's got 2 phones on the table." They were watching him through the coffee shop window, waiting for the signal. "Go," Heather texted her captain. She didn't grab for the gun. She struck his wrist, a sharp, precise blow to the nerve cluster. His hand went numb, the fingers spasming open. The pistol clattered to the linoleum floor. Gasps hit like a wave. Chairs scraped. Cameras rose. In the same motion, she spun him around, controlling his arm, and pushed him face first onto a table, pinning him there. It was over in 3 seconds. She kicked the gun away where it spun into a corner. "Nobody move," she commanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room with absolute authority. The panic stopped. Everyone just stared. Heather held the struggling man down with one hand and pulled out her phone with the other. "This is Sheriff Walker," she said into the phone. "I have a 1032 at the Oakwood Community Center. Situation is secure. Suspect in custody. No shots fired." The silence in the room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. Then a dozen other phones came up, their cameras all pointing at the scene. They had just watched a woman in a floral blouse single-handedly and unarmed take down a man with a gun. They had also just heard her identify herself as the sheriff. Karen Lawson's face was a perfect picture of disbelief and horror. Her jaw was hanging open. The power in the room had shifted completely and irrevocably. Deputies arrived moments later, calm and professional. They took Henderson into custody. He was crying, babbling about the fines, the harassment. He'd made a terrible choice, but I couldn't help but feel a sliver of pity for him. He was just another person Karen had pushed past the breaking point. As the deputies led him away, Heather walked over and picked up the silver pistol, handling it with practiced care. She turned to the crowd. "The meeting is over," she said. "Go home." People filed out in a daze, whispering to each other, looking at Heather with a mixture of awe and fear. We were the last to leave. As we walked past the podium, I looked at Karen Lawson. She was still standing there, pale and trembling. She had tried to rule with fear, but she had just seen what real authority looked like, and it wasn't her. Karen was a cornered animal now, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. She couldn't use physical intimidation anymore. Heather had shut that down twice. She couldn't use public humiliation. The HOA meeting had blown up in her face, so she fell back on the weapon she thought she could control completely. The bylaws. The day after the meeting, a notice was taped to our front door. It was a final warning. My pickup truck, the one I used for work, was to be removed from the property within 24 hours for being a commercial vehicle. If it wasn't, it would be towed at my expense. The truck was parked in my driveway, exactly where it had been for the last 5 years. It was a blatant, desperate power play. I read the notice and just laughed. I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. The next night, I was sitting in the living room reading a book. Heather was at the station working late. Around 11 p.m., I heard the telltale hiss of air brakes and the low rumble of a heavy diesel engine outside. I looked out the window. A big, greasy-looking tow truck was backing into my driveway, its yellow emergency lights flashing, painting the whole street in a sickly, strobing light. The driver, a skinny guy with a cigarette dangling from his lips, hopped out and started hooking a chain to my truck's axle. I hit the non-emergency line, left the call open on speaker and started recording. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice level. The driver didn't even look at me. "I got a tow order from the HOA. Your truck's gotta go." "This is private property," I said. "And that vehicle is legally parked. You have no authority to tow it." He finally looked at me and smirked. "Tell it to the HOA. I'm just doing my job. You interfere, I call the cops for obstruction." He'd done this before. Most people back down. I wasn't most people. "This is an illegal tow," I stated clearly for the camera. "I'm ordering you to unhook my vehicle and leave my property immediately." The driver laughed and turned back to the chain. Not going to happen, pal." That's when the passenger door of the tow truck opened. A second man got out. He was big, much bigger than the driver, and he was carrying a length of heavy tow chain in his hand, swinging it loosely by his side. An enforcer. This wasn't a standard tow. This was a planned ambush. They were expecting me to come out. They were expecting a fight. The big guy walked toward me, the chain making a soft metallic whisper as it swung. And the man said to back off, he grunted. You should listen." He was trying to intimidate me, to scare me into backing down so they could steal my truck. I stood my ground. I've spent my life working with heavy equipment, with chains and levers and steel. I know what a chain can do. I also know it's slow. It's heavy. It has momentum. You take one more step onto my property with that thing, and you're going to regret it, I warned. He grinned, a nasty, broken-toothed expression. He thought I was bluffing. He took the step and he swung the chain. It wasn't a wild swing. It was a low, sweeping arc aimed at my legs, meant to knock me off my feet. I did the one thing he didn't expect. I moved toward it. I stepped inside the arc of the swing, letting the heavy chain whip past behind me. His momentum carried him forward, off balance. In that split second, I had him. I grabbed the wrist of his swinging arm with both my hands. I planted my foot, pivoted my hips, and dropped my weight, pulling his arm straight and over my shoulder. It was a basic armbar, a move built on pure leverage. His body had no choice but to follow his arm. He flipped over my back and landed hard on the driveway with a loud breath-stealing thud. He lay there groaning, his arm bent at an angle it wasn't designed for. The chain lay uselessly beside him. "Sir, you're under arrest for destruction of property and assault," she said. The man laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You're not arresting me." He took a half step toward her. It was the stupidest move of his life. He never saw it coming. Heather closed the distance in 2 quick, silent steps. She didn't draw her weapon. She didn't need to. Her left hand shot out and grabbed his right wrist. Her right hand secured his elbow. It was a blur of motion. She used his own forward momentum against him, twisting his arm up behind his back in a perfect wrist-control takedown. The big man let out a squeal of pain as his joints locked. He dropped to his knees, his face contorted. It was over in less than 2 seconds. No struggle, no fight, just a clean surgical application of leverage and technique. She had him pinned face down on the grass before he could even process what had happened. "My husband is the witness," she said into the radio on her shoulder. "The suspect is in custody." I walked over and picked up the heavy pliers from the ground. I looked down at the so-called tough guy, now whimpering on my lawn with the county sheriff's knee in his back. The cuffs clicked shut. A city cruiser rolled past first and cleared the call. 1 minute later, 2 county deputies rolled up and got out. They knew the drill. They helped the guy to his feet and put him in the back of the car, reading him his rights. He never looked at me. He never looked at Heather. He just stared at the ground, his face a mask of humiliation. As the car pulled away, Heather turned to me. She looked at the open breaker box, then at me. "Are you okay?" She asked. I nodded. "I'm fine. I've got the whole thing on video." I showed her the clip on my phone. She watched it, her expression grim. "Good," she said. "That's number 4. She looked down at her hands, then flexed her fingers. "He'll talk," she said. "People like that always talk when they realize their boss can't protect them from a felony charge." I knew she was right. This wasn't just about harassment anymore. This was a criminal conspiracy, and we were just getting started pulling on the threads. The arrest of Karen's main goon sent a ripple through the neighborhood. Neighbors whispered. They didn't know Heather was the sheriff, but they knew a cop had taken the guy down, and they knew he worked for Karen Lawson. It was the first crack in her carefully constructed dam of authority. Karen, of course, doubled down. A new wave of violation notices appeared, taped to the doors of anyone who had ever looked at her sideways. The fines were astronomical, the reasons absurd. One neighbor was cited for having aesthetically displeasing wind chimes, as another for their garden hose not being coiled in a perfect circle. It was a transparent show of force meant to remind everyone who was in charge. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled for that Saturday. It was usually a dull affair, a handful of retirees arguing about the budget for petunias. This year, the community center was packed. People were angry. They were scared, and they were looking for a fight. Heather and I went. She was off duty, dressed in a simple blouse and jeans. We sat in the back just observing. Karen was at the podium, radiating smug confidence. She had her little board of directors flanking her like Secret Service agents. She opened the meeting by dismissing all the new fines as standard enforcement procedure. She refused to answer any questions. The tension in the room was thick enough to chew. Then a man stood up. His name was Mr. Patel. He owned a small convenience store just outside our development. He was a quiet gentleman who worked 16 hours a day. Mrs. Lawson, he began, his voice trembling slightly. You have fined me $5,000 because the paint on my mailbox post is, you say, the incorrect shade of white. I have the approved color code. I have the receipt from the paint store. This is not right. Karen looked down at him from the podium, a cruel little smile on her face. Mr. Patel, if you cannot afford to maintain your property to the community standards, perhaps you should consider living elsewhere. The fine stands next. She smiled like pain was a policy. The room erupted. People were shouting. Mr. Patel stood there, utterly defeated. I felt a surge of anger. This was her method. Public humiliation. Crushing people one by one so they were too scared to stand together. That's when it happened. Another man, a guy named Henderson, who had been in a long-running dispute with Karen over a fence, jumped to his feet. This is garbage, Karen. You're a thief! Adi screamed, his face turning purple. He started toward the podium. Karen's two board members, both beefy guys from the neighborhood watch, moved to intercept him. Henderson, in a moment of sheer idiotic panic, reached behind his back and pulled out a small silver pistol. The room went silent. A collective gasp sucked all the air out. People screamed. They started to scramble, to dive under the flimsy folding tables. Henderson wasn't aiming it at anyone in particular. He was just holding it, waving it wildly, his eyes wide with fear and rage. He had crossed a line he could never uncross. Karen Lawson froze behind the podium. Her smug mask was replaced by genuine terror. Her enforcers backed away, their hands up. There were bullies, not bodyguards, but Heather didn't freeze. She moved. While everyone else was reacting to the gun, she was already solving the problem. She rose from her chair in one smooth, fluid motion. She didn't shout. She didn't draw attention to herself. She moved through the chaos like a ghost, using the panic of the crowd as cover. She came up on Henderson's right side, his blind spot. I saw her hand flash out. Heather didn't move. Be at my office at 9:12 a.m. for statements, or we'll come to you with warrants, she said. Don't be late. They practically ran to their unmarked white van parked down the street and sped off. Headlights snapping on at the corner. I closed the door and slid the deadbolt home. 2 doors down, Aunt Dot's porch light clicked on. Boys, she called, robe and slippers. That badge is shiny. So is tinfoil. Which is it? The adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a cold anger. I turned to Heather. Karen Lawson, I said. She nodded slowly. This has her fingerprints all over it. Clever, manipulative, and ruthless. I walked back to the kitchen and watched the saved video clip from the door camera. The men in their green polos, the clear view of their faces in the solar light, our red roof visible just above the door frame. I saved a copy. She just made a very big mistake, Heather said from the doorway. I looked at the video again. Yeah, she fed the camera. We'll feed the court. The first piece of evidence in a stack that was about to get a whole lot taller. The next 2 days held their breath. The power was back on within an hour, the fake inspectors fleeing. A quick call from Heather to the utility company sorted that out. They sent a real technician who confirmed the curb box had been deliberately shut down. He filed a formal report. Karen loves paper trails until the paper walks into court wearing boots. That was piece number 2 for our growing stack. I spent the time working in my garage, trying to lose myself in the familiar comfort of tools and machinery. I was rebuilding the carburetor for an old pickup truck, a job that required focus. But my mind kept drifting back to the men on our porch, to Karen Lawson. We'd had run-ins with her before. Minor stuff. A notice about the grass being a 1/4 inch too high. A complaint that my work truck parked in my own driveway was a commercial vehicle and violated some obscure bylaw she had invented last Tuesday. We paid to keep peace. This was different. This was an escalation. This was a declaration of war. Heather was handling it her way. Methodical, patient, by the book. She had her deputies quietly looking into the registered owner of the white van. She was building a legal case. My way was different. I wanted to go down to Karen's perfectly manicured house, knock on her door, and have a very direct, very blue-collar conversation. But I knew that's what she wanted. She wanted me to lose my temper. She wanted me to be the unreasonable one. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. On the 3rd day, it happened again. I was in the garage, a tiny jet from the carburetor held up to the light, when I heard a noise from the sides of the house. A metallic clang. Not a normal sound. I put the part down and moved silently to the side door of the garage. I cracked it open just enough to see. There, standing next to our main breaker box, was one of the men from the other morning. It was the leader, the one with the gravelly voice. He had the panel door open and was holding a pair of heavy pliers. He wasn't trying to cut the power this time. He looked like he was trying to rip the whole meter off the wall. This was pure vandalism, pure intimidation. My blood ran hot, then cold. My first instinct was to charge out there, but I remembered Heather's calm. I took a deep breath. I pulled out my phone and hit record, holding it steady through the crack in the door. I got a good clear shot of his face, the green polo shirt, the pliers in his hand, and the open breaker box. I filmed for a full 30 seconds, capturing his frustration as he struggled with the wiring. That was piece number 3. Then I put the phone in my pocket and stepped out of the garage. Looking for another fire hazard? I asked. My voice was low, but it carried in the quiet afternoon. He jumped, spinning around. The pliers clattered to the ground. For a second, he looked terrified. Then his fear hardened into a sneer. He was bigger than me, not taller, but wider. He was built like a refrigerator, loud, runs harder, and needs a plug. He clearly thought he could handle a guy who spent his days with carburetors. You need to learn to mind your own business, he growled, taking a step toward me. This is my business, I said, standing my ground. It's my house, the one you keep trying to break. He took another step. He was in my personal space now, trying to use his size to back me down. You and your cop wife need to learn your place. Karen runs this neighborhood. You don't want to be on her bad side. I just looked at him. I've dealt with bullies my whole life. They all have the same playbook. You're trespassing, I said calmly. And you're on camera again. I'd leave if I were you. The mention of the camera made him pause. He glanced around nervously, but his ego was too big to just walk away. He decided to push, literally. He shoved me hard in the chest. Oh, what are you gonna do about it, old man? I stumbled back a step, but kept my feet. I didn't shove back. I didn't throw a punch. I just waited because I had heard the quiet click of the back door opening. He's not going to do anything, Heather's voice said. It was still calm, always calm. But there was an edge to it now, a blade of steel. The big man turned. Heather was standing on the patio about 10 feet away. She was in her uniform, the full kit, the badge, the belt, the sidearm. She looked 10 feet tall. I recently faced my own worst nightmare. 3 HOA inspectors knocked on my door wanting to talk to my wife. The reason, they said, was that they needed to do an emergency utility inspection. Funny thing is, the only ones who got inspected that day was them when my wife flashed her sheriff's badge. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Daniel Walker. I fix things for a living. Engines, pipes, wiring, things that are broken and need to be made right. I always figured that was my place in the world, a man with a good set of tools and the patience to use them. If it squeaks, leaks, or shocks, I'm the guy with tape, torque, and bad jokes. My wife, Heather, she fixes things too. Bigger things, broken systems, broken people. Last week, after the old sheriff retired with a sudden case of I'd rather be fishing, the county commissioners appointed Heather to fill his spot. It was quiet. No election. No big announcement yet. No signs, no posts. We kept it quiet for safety. Just a new badge on her belt and a weight on her shoulders I could see even when she was sleeping. We live a simple life. Or we did. Our house has a red roof. I painted it myself one blistering July. It's a good house on a quiet street. But quiet streets have a way of attracting loud people. People like Karen Lawson, president of our homeowners association. Karen collects bylaws like trading cards and spends them like cash. And that's how it all started. Not with a bang, but with a heavy rhythmic pounding on my front door before the sun had even thought about getting up. The digital clock on the nightstand read 4:52 a.m. The pounding came again. Not a friendly knock. This was official sounding, meant to intimidate. I swung my legs out of bed. Heather was already awake, sitting up, her eyes clear. She wasn't a jumpy person. Her calmness had a way of calming me down usually, but this felt different. I glanced at my phone on the charger. The screen was dark. The whole house was dark. The power was out. I felt a knot tighten in my gut. A power outage and a pounding door at this hour is a bad combination. I walked to the front window and peeked through the blinds. The street lights were out. The whole block was a black hole, except for our porch. A single bright LED porch light, powered by a small solar panel I'd installed last year, cut a perfect circle of white on our lawn. Inside that circle stood 3 men. They were big guys, all with trim beards in the same uniform, dark green polo shirts with some kind of yellow text and khaki pants. Professional, except for the time of day. Professional cosplay, maybe? Stay here, I whispered to Heather. She just nodded, her expression unreadable. Heather smiled, already 3 steps ahead. I pulled on a pair of jeans and walked to the door. My other phone, the one connected to the door camera, buzzed on the kitchen counter. I picked it up. The camera, also on its own solar-charged battery, was working perfectly. I had a crystal clear view of the 3 men. The yellow text on their shirts read, Inspector, Oakwood HOA. Dark green polos, yellow text, khaki pants, beards. I snorted. Our HOA didn't have inspectors. They had Karen Lawson and a newsletter full of passive-aggressive reminders about lawn maintenance. One of the men looked impatient. He pounded the door again, harder this time. Oakwood HOA Emergency Utility Inspection, he boomed. His voice was gravelly, forced. He was playing a part. I watched him on the phone screen. He glanced up directly at the camera, then quickly looked away. He knew it was there. He just didn't expect it to be working. The solar light turned hide and seek into show and tell. Out by the curb box, the lock tab hung, snapped. Another thing the camera caught. I opened the door a few inches, leaving the chain on. It's 5 a.m, I said, my voice flat. What kind of emergency? The man in the middle, clearly the leader, puffed out his chest. Sir, we have a report of a major power fluctuation originating from this address. We need to inspect your main breaker panel immediately. It's a fire hazard, loud enough for the block. It was a performance. I looked past him down the street toward the green utility box at the curb. I knew exactly how they cut the power. It wasn't a fluctuation. It was a switch, a deliberate act. You cut the power at the curb, I said. It wasn't a question. The man's face tightened. Sir, we're authorized inspectors. We need access to your property now. He put his hand on my door as if to push it open. The chain groaned. That was a mistake. Behind me, I heard a soft footstep. Heather was there. She wore a brown leather jacket over a white t-shirt and jeans. She looked like any other homeowner woken up too early. Gentlemen, she said, her voice even and calm. It cut through the morning air like a surgeon's scalpel. Could you please state your names and show me your county-issued solicitor permits? The leader stared at her, then back at me. He was losing control of his little play. Ma'am, this is an official HOA matter. We don't need permits for emergency actions. Heather took another step forward into the solar-powered spotlight. She held up her left hand. In it was her new badge, an ID of the gold star gleamed. I'm Sheriff Heather Walker, she said with no more emphasis than if she were ordering coffee. She kept a small smile. And this is my house. You are trespassing. You have tampered with public utility equipment, which is a felony, and you're attempting to gain entry to a private residence under false pretenses. So I'm going to ask you one more time for your name. The 3 men froze. Their faces so full of bluster a moment ago went slack. They looked at the badge, then at Heather, then at each other. The leader's jaw worked, but no sound came out. They were actors who had just forgotten all their lines. They hadn't planned for this. They had planned for a scared couple in the dark. They got a spotlight and the chief law enforcement officer of the entire county. We could have hooked them right there, but a 5 a.m. porch fight with unknown guns is how headlines get ugly. Better to log faces, plates, and moves. The silence stretched. The only sound was a distant bird starting its morning song. The leader finally found his voice. It was a meek whisper. There's been a misunderstanding. He and his 2 buddies started backing away from the door. their hands held up slightly as if to ward off a ghost. We'll come back during normal business hours.